Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's once again my pleasure to take go to my feet and talk about the STDC slush fund of the Liberals and the corruption that has gone through this organization from top to bottom for years and years, 9 long years, Mr. Speaker, and also bringing a debate about some other of governments that have also had some scandals. I come from Saskatchewan, and for a long time, I wasn't proud of it, but it was National Government Party was the NDP in Saskatchewan, and they had scandal after scandal after scandal. So we will compare and contrast some of the scandals of my home province with some of the scandals that are happening right here in Ottawa, Mr. Speaker. But first, I hope I have some leeway from my friend from Kingston and the Islands. I would like to take this time, not sure if I'll be on my feet again, to wish everyone in Canada a very Merry Christmas. Across Regina Louvain, where Christmas is one of my favorite times of the year, Mr. Speaker. So thank you very much, and bring some joy to this chamber. And Christmas is excellent. My wife's we got the Christmas tree up on November the 12th, so she was very, very excited to get the Christmas tree up.
Save
and
all that GST.
I should have waited for the GST break, I guess, but we had the tree up a little bit before the GST cut came in to place, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to say we did some hard work, and we got the backyard rink ready so we can have a hockey game with the kids and the uncles and with us for Boxing Day, when we welcome the start of the World Junior Hockey Championship that's being hosted right here in Ottawa. So good luck to Team Canada. It's a family tradition to watch all the junior hockey games. I'm looking forward to that as well. So thank you for the leeway, Mr. Chair. And on to the SDTC slush fund. And I talked about this earlier on with my question to my colleague from Caribou Prince George, and I said one scandal that took down the Martin Liberals was ad scam. It was an advertising scandal that rocked Quebec, and it was something that really shows Liberals what they do when they're in government. They actually, at some point in time, believe they're above the law. They believe that they have divine right to govern, and they take every opportunity to enrich their friends and family. We see it time and time again. It's not a flaw of the Liberal organization. It's actually the raison d'etre. This is the reason that they want a government, so that they can enrich their friends and family. So after they get voted out and the Conservatives have to come in and clean up their mess, then their friends and family can give them cushy parachute jobs so that they have the opportunity to make money while they wait for their turn to come back into government and wreck everything again, so Conservatives have to clean up their mess. So the SDTC slush fund, Mr. Speaker, is a $420 million fund that was set up by this Liberal government. And the board was put in place by this Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. And the key mandate for SDTC, it was a federally funded nonprofit that approves and disperses over 100 million in funds, now 400, to clean technology companies. Ironically, many of these companies, Mr. Speaker, have direct relations to people in cabinet. And the chair of this organization, the SDTC, actually gave money to their very own company. And Mr. Speaker, that is something that it's actually my colleague from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, really something nice talking about common sense. Lots of people would say it would be common sense that if you're on a board, especially a chair of the board, appointed by the government to give funds to clean tech companies, you would automatically assume that your company would not be eligible, or at the bare minimum, recluse yourself from those discussions. None of this happened with this corrupt organization, Mr. Speaker. So here are the numbers. The audit found, the Auditor General found, our audit found that funding was approved by SDTC board for 10 ineligible projects, 96 cases where conflict of interest policies weren't followed, 90 cases where conflict of interest policies were also not followed, projects without ensuring contribution agreement terms were met, 19.5 for seed stream, and $38.5 million for COVID relief payments. The funding that were overlaps were $62 million for a grand total of $390 million that was given out to ineligible or two projects that were found by the auditor to be in conflict of interest. Mr. Speaker, this is something that has rocked the Liberal Party of Canada and their junior partner, the NDP. The fact that these documents are so bad, Mr. Speaker, that's why we're seized with this debate again, day in and day out, is Liberals and their NDP junior partners are terrified to see what is in these documents. They have no idea how bad this is going to get, so they just don't even want to look at what has happened in this case, Mr. Speaker. And I remember in 2015, the then member from Papineau was running around the country, 2015 campaign, sunny ways. And a direct quote, Mr. Speaker, is, "There will never be a more open and transparent government in the history of Canada than the one headed by the member from Papineau." What an absolute failure. Mr. Speaker, there has been over 70 scandals that I will get to by this government alone. And at the head of these scandals is the current NDP Liberal Prime Minister, who himself has been in breach of the conflict of interest not once, but twice. Mr. Speaker, I once heard a very good quote from a fine football movie called Remember the Titans. And the quote was, "Attitude reflects leadership." And you see that within the Liberal NDP caucuses. Their leaders, that's what their attitude is. The rules for thee, but not for me. And that comes straight from the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Speaker. They believe they're above the law. They believe that taxpayers' dollars are there for them to spend as they please. And conflict of interest be damned, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't matter to them. They are very much entitled to their entitlements, which I think came from one of their members a few years ago, Mr. Speaker. And the funds that are going out, I feel that, yes, Dingwall said that he was entitled to his entitlements. And Mr. Speaker, the funds that are going out, I don't know if this is actually a strategy that the NDP Liberals have, is maybe if we have so many scandals that the Canadian population will just be accustomed to it. Maybe if there's so many wrongdoings within this government that the Canadian population will be like, just another Liberal NDP scandal. What else would you expect? It's kind of what they do. As the member from Regina Coppell stated eloquently, he said, "Liberals are getting liberal," and that's really what we're seeing here. It is actually embedded into their ideology that taxpayers' dollars are their own. And I say this in many speeches, and it bears repeating. They should realize, these NDP Liberals should realize, government has never earned a dollar. Government only takes money through taxation to individuals or businesses that make that money. And that's how they get their funds, Mr. Speaker. And I think that we need to look at the ideology within the Liberal Party. They will give money to their friend. We had clam scam. You know what? I think I do have a list of all the scandals here, Madam Speaker, which I'd like to run through and talk about it. Because the Canadian population, I think, have become accustomed to Liberal scandals. I think they expect a new scandal every week. And, well, the Liberals are obliging them because we have a new scandal every week. Another Randy. There are so many, so I'll start from the top, and we put this list together in my office. So obviously we have the Prime Minister's first breach of ethics when he took the Agacon vacation scandal, when he took tens of thousands of dollars vacation to a private island. I don't have many friends that own private islands. I don't know if any other members do, but that's probably not even an option for many of us that are in the House of Commons, Madam Speaker. We have the prison needle exchange program, pressuring the Justice Minister to get Liberal donor SNC Lavalin off the hook and firing the Justice Minister for not helping cover it up. So, Madam Speaker, that is really the Jody Wilson-Raybould saga that ended in the Prime Minister unceremoniously dumping the first Indigenous female Justice Minister. But that's just the first of many competent, strong women that this Prime Minister has thrown under the bus, and we'll get to more of those, Madam Speaker. We have, some people experience things differently response over groping allegations. The We Charity scandal, which the member from Kingston Island did talk about, how are you going to fix the budget? And I'd like to add to the answer from my colleague. You fix the budget by cutting the wasteful spending. The hundreds of millions of dollars given to We Charity over the years, Madam Speaker. There's an easy cut. Madam Speaker, also the ability to grow the public service exponentially, but yet more than double the amount of money being paid to outside consultants. The member said it how do you grow government and grow the money you're giving to outside consulting, third-party consulting contracts? Millions, hundreds of millions to McKinsey. There's another easy cut to save taxpayers money. So that we're probably at about 200 million right there, Madam Speaker. The Canada Infrastructure Bank hasn't finished a project in this country. I think that's billion. That's a couple $billion where you can bring that money home and actually get projects built in our country, Madam Speaker. So there's more money that can be saved. So when we talk about common sense approaches to fixing the budget, there is some concrete examples right there, Madam Speaker. So we were on We Charity. We have the Trudeau, the Prime Minister, the member from Papineau, when he elbowed the NDP female member in the House of Commons. That was another scandal that rocked this nation, the Prime Minister being physical with another MP. Proroguing Parliament to escape the WE scandal. Once again, building on the WE scandal, Madam Speaker. Sending personal protective equipment to China during the pandemic. I remember there's a stockhouse filled with protective equipment in Regina, and they actually just threw it out, Madam Speaker, during the pandemic. Giving hundreds of thousands of dollars in ventilator contracts to Liberal Party insider Frank Baylis, whose company didn't even produce ventilators. Madam Speaker, it should have been that's foreshadowing what happened with the SDTC scandal, Madam Speaker, is giving money to Liberal insiders. Fake charges against Mark Norman, the member from Calgary Skyview. What he did in 2021, he actually took people's mail out of their mailboxes, so that was another scandal, Madam Speaker. Illegally invoking the Emergencies Act, one of my personal favorite, as when the NDP used to stand for something. When the last time the Emergencies Act was invoked was when the NDP actually stood for something, and the then member named Tommy Douglas said it was like cracking a peanut with a sledgehammer invoking the War Measures Act. But a long time ago, that NDP stood for something. Now they stand for nothing but their leader's pension and keeping this current scandal-plagued Prime Minister in power. PHAC fund found committing contempt of Parliament in Winnipeg lab docs. I remember that. And the Liberals then took their own speaker to court, I believe, Madam Speaker. Trampling Canadians with horses, seizing Canadians' bank accounts. That was one that was something I've never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Rampant abuse of staff in the Liberal Prime Minister's appointed Governor General's office. Governor General wasting $100,000 to throw private jet parties. Connection with illegal casino magnates. Vaccine delays. The Liberal Prime Minister dressing up in racist costumes on official trips to India. Liberal Prime Minister dressing up in racist blackface. Mass airport delays and cancellations. Decriminalizing hard drugs. The member from Prince George Caribou gave a wonderful speech on how in his province the decriminalizing of harmful drugs and hard drugs has caused the #1 cause of death in his province from 18 to 27-year-olds to be overdoses. That is a direct result of the NDP government in BC and these Liberals agreeing to legalize hard drugs, Madam Speaker. Sending diplomats to a party at Russian embassy during the invasion of Ukraine was another scandal. Madam Speaker, Liberal Prime Minister is polluting more in 1 year with his private jet than the average Canadian does in half a lifetime. That's another thing where we see the Liberals prop themselves up as stewards of the environment when they pollute more through private jet use than half a lifetime of Canadians. That's another example also of what we talked about earlier is do as we say, not as we do, Madam Speaker. This list gets longer. I think every time I give the speech, the minister giving a $17,000 contract to a Liberal-aligned media firm, Liberal Prime Minister letting Thomas Reuters take his chief of staff to the White House press correspondent dinner, D&D minister misrepresented his service in the military, trying to get unwarranted border searches of electronics, restriction on online free speech. We all remember the anti-free speech bill the Liberals tried to get through before the last election, and we were able to slow that down. The Liberal Prime Minister spending $11 million to renovate his cottage. Can you imagine an $11 million renovation? I think that would be something that Canadians would see as a waste of taxpayers' dollars. Raising the carbon tax during an energy crisis, deceiving the public about electoral reform. I remember, was it 2015? I believe it was 2015, colleagues, where it was going to be the last election of first past the post. And that was another promise the Prime Minister, hand over heart, promised that he was going to change the electoral system, Madam Speaker. Another memory of the Prime Minister doing his Care Bear stare and hand over his heart was when he went to national TV and looked Canadians in the eye during COVID and said, "Your government will take on debt so you don't have to." Obviously, this came from a man who never thinks about monetary policy or doesn't think about fiscal policy either. Can you imagine a Prime Minister saying the government will take on debt so that Canadians don't have to? Who does he think pays the debt back? Who pays the debt back, Madam Speaker, is my question. Does he think he can just print money? Well, obviously he actually does think he can just print money, which he has done over the last year that caused the inflation crisis of Canadians. When you look at what the prices have done at the grocery store, more and more Canadians are going to the grocery store and just seeing they can't buy the essentials to feed their family. And that is a direct cause of this Prime Minister's lack of knowledge when it comes to fiscal and monetary policy, because he doesn't think about it, Madam Speaker. The grocery prices that we've seen continue to go up because of the policies of these Liberals. And then inflation happens, and then what did we see? We saw the increase of mortgages across this country, and people are finding it harder and harder to pay a mortgage. And Madam Speaker, when it comes down to it, when people can't afford the groceries they need for their kids and can't afford to keep a roof over their head because of the doubling of mortgages and the doubling of rent based on this reckless fiscal policy of this Prime Minister, then they look at something like this. They look at this debate and they wonder, how on earth could a government headed by these Liberal NDPs spend $400 million of our money and give it to their friends and party insiders? Those are the questions we get in the riding. How do they think it is? They think they're above the law because they give money to their friends and family, and people are left holding the bag. So I hopefully my friend from the Kingston and Islands can get on his feet and explain how if a government goes into debt, that the Canadian taxpayer doesn't pay that money back through taxation and increase taxes. I think that's one of the reasons they have such an infatuation with the carbon tax, Madam Speaker, is because they are trying to get money any way they can from Canadians. And if they use this tax policy, not an environmental policy, they get more money into the coffers. And then on top of that, which is not in the book, but it should be a scandal, then the NDP Liberals charge GST on the carbon tax that they're charging Canadians. It's a tax on a tax, Madam Speaker, which I get many questions in my office how that's even legal, that you can tax a tax. We're going on to a few more scandals, Madam Speaker. Oh, the more than 72 secret orders and councils that they have passed over the last 9 years, Madam Speaker. We also have the eliminating mandatory minimums for gun offenses while going after law-abiding firearms owners, like Uncle Joe's rifle that we talked about in question period earlier this day, Madam Speaker. They think for some reason that the actual numbers don't lie. Over the last 9 years of this government, 9 long years of this government, gun crime has increased by 116%. And they think by going after our sport shooters, our law-abiding firearm owners, gun crime is going to go down. I don't understand why they can't wrap their mind around the fact that it is not law-abiding firearms owners that are causing gun crime to go up. It's the illegal guns coming across our border. It's the criminals that are actually breaking the law. So what we need to do is have a common sense policy that gets more border stops, more checks at the borders, and putting criminals in jail where they belong instead of on bail. Madam Speaker, I'll talk about that one for one more minute the fact that their jail and bail has hurt communities across this country. And one is my community in Grand Coulee, where someone was charged with child pornography and he was let out on conditions the day of his court back into our community. That's what these Liberals have done to this country.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Deputy Health Leader.
I know that the Conservatives like to reference the Prime Minister's comment on monetary policy from a few years ago. I'm curious, could the member give us his perspective on the monetary policy of Canada?
Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
I was expecting a bit more from the member from Kingston Islands than that. Obviously, he's a little bit slower today for some reason. But the fact that he doesn't understand that you can't spend money that you don't have is a very, very basic principle. And the fact that this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberals have produced more debt and put the country more indebted than all other prime ministers combined shows a very lack of fiscal understanding from everyone on those benches.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Headingley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to follow up on that question because it wasn't only that the Prime Minister didn't want to think about monetary policy, but even more recently, just within the past few weeks, he actually said he wanted to leave the economy to the bankers. So I wanted to ask my colleague about that. Isn't that a total abdication of responsibility by a Prime Minister to say he doesn't want anything to do with the economy?
He should just resign.
Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much for that question. And I think that isn't the only responsibility this Prime Minister has abdicated from. He's abdicated from keeping our streets safe. Crime's gone up all over this country. He's had a total abdication of policy when it comes to legalizing harmful drugs. So the fact that he doesn't think about fiscal policy and he says leave it to the bankers is quite scary. But we see by his printing of billions of dollars and in causing the inflationary crisis that he doesn't have the skills to deal with the job at hand.
Questions et commentaires. L'Honourable Député de Thérèse.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. There is an area where I agree with my colleague regarding the fact that there is an attempt to sweep scandals under the rug. The government has been asked for some time to produce these documents, but it hasn't. So the House of Commons has been paralyzed since September. There's another scandal, too. The We Charity scandal. Once again, I remember that the government managed to sweep it under the rug by proroguing the House. There's another scandal that we don't hear enough about, which is about workers. And I'm talking about the Phoenix pay system that the Conservatives brought into place and that this government promised to repair. But it wasn't done. There's also the EI system that the Conservative government at the time raided and left many unemployed workers struggling to make ends meet. So does my colleague's political party, would his political party be ready to offer an adequate Phoenix pay system and an EI system to help workers? The Honourable Member knows that I don't have a political party. I'm in this chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the question. There are many, many more scandals. I think I only got number 40 on my list of 75. But I believe, I wasn't here, but I believe that the advice from the then Conservative government was for the Liberals not to continue with the Phoenix pay system and do something different, is what I've been told. So I think there does need to be a system in place to make sure that the workers are paid properly. But I think we go back to the point I made earlier with my honourable colleague is the Liberals are trying to make it just a natural day when another scandal breaks out. They want to get so many scandals that Canadians just shrug it off and say, Liberals are getting liberal. Liberals and scandals are synonymous with each other, and that's not a flaw of the system. That is what they bring when they come to government. They come to government, and scandals follow them everywhere they go. Similar to the NDP in Saskatchewan, scandals followed them everywhere that they went as well.
Questions et commentaires. L'Honourable Député de Rosemont-la-Petite.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it's very interesting to hear the Conservatives talk about the elites as though the Conservative Party were not an elite of big CEOs, big companies, financiers throughout Canada. And the proof of the fact that they're hand in hand with these people is that when they were in power, they gave tens of billions of dollars in tax benefits to these big businesses, even though that meant that they ended up having to cut services to people. That hurt veterans, workers. It hurt patients in the health system. And in fact, due to their cuts, they weren't even then able to balance the budget, although they finally were able to do so only through a fire sale that they did in 2015. I have no idea what kind of magical thinking the Conservatives are engaging in. We can't just hand out gifts to big business and then try to compensate by cutting services.
These NDP members are complicit in propping up the most scandal-plagued government in the history of Canada. These NDP members couldn't even stand behind their own leaders' words when they said the Liberals are full of corporate greed and they want to tear up their agreement on their coalition agreement. So I'll take no lessons from an NDP rump roast of a party that can't stand up and support their own leaders' words and prop up the most corrupt government in the history of Canada.
The Honourable Deputy House Leader.
So it's clear from my previous question and his answer that perhaps my friend doesn't quite understand the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Both fiscal and monetary policies are meant to affect an economy and to curb or increase or decrease economic output. Monetary policy is what the Bank of Canada does. It's what the central bank in the United States does. And actually, rightfully so, no government should really put itself in the business of affecting monetary policy. If you don't believe me on that, ask the member for Abbotsford. He made that very clear a few years ago. Fiscal policy is when the government spends or holds back on spending money in order to affect economic output. So given this, can the member now provide me with his thoughts on the monetary policy of Canada?
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
I thank my colleague very much for the lesson in fiscal and monetary policy, which I agree that they need to have a lot more lessons in his cabinet. So maybe if he got to the cabinet table, he could explain to the finance minister that difference, because her fiscal policy, her fiscal guardrails have done nothing but run this country's economy over the edge and created a dumpster fire of debt. It is amazing that Liberals are so confident, but the number one expense on our budget sheet right now, Madam Speaker, is debt payment. That is horrendous, Madam Speaker, and the fact that this Prime Minister, aided by his NDP colleagues, have driven up debt in this country and accumulated more debt than any other. All the Prime Ministers combined over the history of our country should show that these people are not fit to make monetary or fiscal decisions.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Resuming debate. The Honourable Member. Sorry? Yes, the Honourable Member for Cypress Hills, Grassland.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to give my colleague from Regina Louvain the opportunity. He said he didn't quite get to all of the scandals that he had on his list because there were just so many of them. So I'm just wondering if he wanted to just take the last minute or two remaining in this time to be able to talk a little bit more about some of the scandals the government has been engaged in over time.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for that question. Some of the scandals I didn't get to were some of the NDP scandals in Saskatchewan and how poorly they governed our province for 16 long years. They used to call it Roy's Revenge. Roy Romano was the NDP Premier of Saskatchewan that closed 152 hospitals in our province. Devastating health care. Roy Romano closed 175 schools. That was one school for every week he was Premier in our province. That devastated rural Saskatchewan. When the NDP were in power, they were so terrible that they haven't won a seat in rural Saskatchewan since Roy's Revenge. So when you talk about scandals, there's also a little thing called Spudco. The NDP in Saskatchewan lost $56 million, and this is back in 1990, on trying to plant potatoes. Saskatchewan's got pretty good agricultural land. The government lost $56 million in Spudco, and this is the kicker, they had something called Mega Bingo. Only a bunch of socialists would lose money on bingo in Saskatchewan. That program, they lost $20 million because they couldn't get bingo right. That's a failure.